The iron gates of Thornhaven groaned open like the jaws of some ancient beast, and Saren Holloway understood with terrible clarity that she was being swallowed whole. Rain struck the carriage windows in relentless sheets, blurring the torchlit drive into smears of amber and shadow. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of wheels over gravel, counting each rotation as if numbers could anchor her to something solid. 17, 18, 19. Behind her, the life she'd known grew smaller with every turn of the wheels. The carriage lurched to a stop, and Saren's stomach lurched with it. Through the rain-streaked window, she glimpsed the manor house rising from the darkness like a threat-made stone. Massive, ancient, unforgiving. Gargoyles crouched along the roofline, their weathered faces frozen in expressions that might have been agony or ecstasy. She couldn't tell which was worse. The carriage door wrenched open. Cold rain and colder air rushed in, stealing her breath. Out! The voice belonged to Phineas Mercer, the man who had orchestrated her family's destruction and her subsequent salvation, if one could call this salvation. He stood in the downpour without an umbrella, water streaming down his angular face, his smile as sharp as a blade's edge. "The Duke doesn't appreciate waiting, Miss Holloway." Saren gathered the worn wool of her traveling cloak, the fabric already damp from the journey. Her fingers trembled, though she told herself it was only the cold. She stepped down from the carriage, and the rain claimed her instantly, soaking through her clothes, plastering her dark hair to her cheeks and neck. The entrance hall doors stood open, spilling golden light across the stone steps. Servants flanked the doorway, their faces carefully blank, and their livery immaculate despite the hour. How many women had they watched arrive like this? How many had climbed these steps with dread pooling in their stomachs? Saren climbed them anyway. Inside, the entrance hall stole what remained of her composure. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow far above. A chandelier the size of a small carriage dripped crystal and candlelight. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Ashworth ancestors staring down with eyes that seemed to track her every movement, judging her, finding her wanting. She was dripping onto marble floors that cost more than her family's entire house. "Wait here," Mercer instructed, then vanished through a door to the left, leaving her alone with the servants who wouldn't meet her eyes and the ancestors who wouldn't stop staring. Saren stood in the center of the hall, acutely aware of every flaw in her appearance. Her dress was 5 years old, mended twice at the hem. Her boots had been resoled so many times, the original leather was barely recognizable. Her cloak smelled of the public coach she'd taken to meet Mercer's carriage, of strangers, and desperation, and the end of everything familiar. She was still cataloging her inadequacies when she heard footsteps. Not the hurried shuffle of a servant, something slower, deliberate. Footsteps that owned the ground they struck. Saren turned, and the air evacuated her lungs. He emerged from the shadows of a corridor she hadn't noticed, materializing like something from a fever dream. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black, as if he'd been carved from the darkness itself. His features were severe, almost cruel in their perfection. A jaw that could cut glass, cheekbones that caught the candlelight and held it hostage. Hair the color of midnight, swept back from a face that showed nothing, gave nothing, promised nothing except power. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Pale gray, like winter ice over deep water. They fixed on her with an intensity that felt physical, a weight pressing against her chest, making each breath a conscious effort. He didn't speak, didn't greet her, simply stood at the edge of the light and studied her, as if she were a ledger entry he was calculating, an asset he was appraising, a debt he was collecting. She supposed that's exactly what she was. Your Grace. Her voice emerged steadier than she'd expected. Small mercy. I am Seren Holloway. I know who you are. His voice matched his appearance. Low, cold, controlled. Each word placed with precision, as if language itself bent to his will. You're shivering, he observed, not with concern, simply as fact. I'm wet. You're terrified. She should have denied it, should have squared her shoulders and lied through her chattering teeth, but something in those ice-pale eyes told her he would know. He would always know. Yes, she admitted. I am. Something flickered across his face, too fast to name, gone before she could grasp it. He moved then, prowling closer with the fluid grace of a predator who had no need to hurry. His prey wasn't going anywhere. They both knew it. He circled her slowly, and Seren forced herself to remain still, to not track his movement like a rabbit watching a wolf. When he stopped, he was directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, despite the cold that clung to her own. Close enough that his breath stirred the wet hair at her temple. Your father owed me 12,000 pounds, he murmured. Your brother added another 3,000 to that debt through sheer incompetence. Your mother's jewelry was sold 6 months ago. Your house is mortgaged twice over. There is nothing left. Nothing except you. Each word landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of shame spreading outward. He knew everything. Every humiliating detail of her family's collapse. So here you are, Seren Holloway. Her name in his mouth sounded different, dangerous. Sold to settle a debt you didn't create. Sacrificed to save a family that couldn't save itself. She swallowed hard. You make it sound so tragic. Isn't it? Tragedy requires surprise. She turned to face him, forcing herself to meet those impossible eyes. I've known we were drowning for years. This is simply the moment I stopped pretending I could swim. A flicker of interest crossed his features. That was not what he'd expected. He reached out, and Seren's breath caught as his fingers brushed her chin. His touch was surprisingly warm against her rain-chilled skin. He tilted her face toward the light, examining her features with an intensity that made her want to pull away and press closer simultaneously. They didn't tell you, he said quietly. Not a question. Tell me what? The Duke of Thornhaven smiled then. It wasn't comforting. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret that would change everything. That we've met before. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. That you were promised to me long before your father's debts came due. Seren's world tilted sideways. That you, he continued, those gray eyes burning into hers, were always mine. The words hung between them like smoke after cannon fire, dense, choking, impossible to wave away. I don't— Seren stepped back, breaking his touch. That can't be true. Can it? The Duke didn't pursue her retreat. He simply stood where she'd left him, a monument to patience. Ask yourself why your father chose this particular solution to his debts. Ask yourself why I agreed to accept a penniless merchant's daughter in lieu of 15,000 pounds. There are easier ways to collect what I'm owed, Miss Holloway. More profitable ones. Her mind raced backward through years of half-remembered conversations. Her father's study door, closed more often than open. Her mother's worried glances across the dinner table. Corwin's desperate schemes that never quite worked. Had there been something else beneath all of it? Some arrangement she'd never been told about? You're lying, she said, though even she could hear the uncertainty threading through the accusation. I never lie. He moved past her toward a doorway she hadn't noticed, pausing at the threshold. I find the truth far more effective. Come. You're still dripping on my floors, and we have matters to discuss. She should refuse. should demand answers here, now, in this grand entrance hall, where at least a dozen servants could witness if he what? She'd already been sold to him. Whatever he intended, she had no legal recourse, no powerful family to intervene, no options beyond the ones he chose to give her. Seren followed. The room he led her to was a study, smaller than she'd expected, warmed by a fire that crackled eagerly in a stone hearth. Books lined every wall, climbing toward a ceiling painted with scenes of hunting and myth. 2 leather chairs faced the fireplace, a small table between them, bearing a crystal decanter and 2 glasses. "Sit," he gestured to the chair closest to the fire, "before you catch your death." She sat because her legs were trembling, and because the fire's warmth was already seeping into her frozen limbs. The Duke took the opposite chair, pouring amber liquid into both glasses. He offered one to her. "Drink. It will help." Brandy. She could smell it. Good brandy. Probably worth more than her entire month's household budget had been before everything fell apart. She took the glass but didn't drink. "What did you mean?" she asked. "About being promised, about knowing me before." The Duke settled into his chair, swirling his brandy in a slow circle. The firelight caught the liquid, turning it to molten gold. 18 years ago, he began, his voice taking on the quality of a recitation. "My father made an arrangement with yours, a betrothal. The Ashworth family had wealth and title. The Holloway family had ambition and connections in trade that could benefit certain investments. A merger of interests, formalized through marriage." Seren's chest constricted. "I would have been 4 years old." "Yes. And you?" 14. Something dark moved through his eyes. "Old enough to object, young enough that my objections didn't matter." She tried to process this. A child bride promised to a boy who would become this cold, imposing man. Contracts signed over cradles. Futures bartered before they could even be imagined. Why didn't my parents tell me? Because the arrangement was dissolved. The Duke took a long drink of his brandy. Or so they believed. My father died 6 months after the contracts were signed. I became Duke at 14, under the control of guardians who had no interest in honoring arrangements made with merchant families. The betrothal was declared void. Your parents were informed that the new Duke had no intention of honoring his predecessor's agreement. Then how? The guardians were wrong. His interruption was sharp. They exceeded their authority. The contract my father signed was binding, ironclad, and very specific. It could not be dissolved by anyone except the parties who signed it. Your father. And me. Serene stared at him, the pieces slowly arranging themselves into a picture she didn't want to see. "My father knew," she whispered. "He knew the betrothal was still valid. He knew. He spent 14 years pretending it wasn't. Building his business, raising his family, hoping I would never discover the truth or never care enough to enforce it." The Duke's smile was thin. "He gambled on my indifference. He lost. So the debts are real. His financial ruin is entirely of his own making. But even if he were the wealthiest man in England, I would still have come for you." The Duke leaned forward, the firelight carving shadows into the planes of his face. "Because you were promised to me, Seren Holloway, and I always collect what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent ice down her spine despite the fire's warmth. "I was a child when that contract was signed. I had no say in it, no knowledge of it." She gripped the arms of her chair. "You can't possibly expect me to honor an arrangement I never agreed to. Can't I? It's monstrous." "Perhaps." He didn't seem troubled by the accusation. "But it's also legal. The contract specifies that Upon the eldest Holloway daughter reaching the age of majority, she shall be presented to the Duke of Thornhaven for fulfillment of the marital agreement. You turned 1 and 23 months ago. Your father has been avoiding my correspondence ever since. 3 months, she thought back. Her father's increased drinking, her mother's sleepless nights, Corwin's frantic deal-making that had only plunged them deeper into debt. They'd all known what was coming, and no one had thought to warn her. So this isn't about the money at all, she said slowly. The debts were just leverage, a way to force my father's hand. The debts were a fortunate coincidence. The Duke set down his empty glass. Without them, your father might have tried to flee, take you abroad, marry you off to someone else before I could enforce the contract. The debts kept him trapped here, in my reach, until I was ready to claim what was always mine. Always mine. There it was again. That phrase that rewrote everything she thought she knew about her life. What if I refuse? Serene forced the question out. What if I simply say no? Then your father goes to debtor's prison. Your mother loses the house. Your brother. The Duke paused, considering. Corwin, isn't it? The one who fancies himself a businessman. He'll be lucky to find work as a clerk once word spreads that the Holloway family defaults on its debts. You would destroy them to punish me for refusing. I would hold them to the consequences of their choices. His voice held no heat, no anger, simply fact. Your father signed a contract and then spent nearly 2 decades pretending it didn't exist. Your brother accumulated debts he couldn't repay. Your mother knew about the betrothal and kept silent. They made their choices, Miss Holloway. Now you must make yours. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. Serene watched them rise and fade, wishing she could dissolve as easily. What exactly do you want from me? She asked. Marriage? Eventually. Eventually? I've waited 18 years. His eyes held hers, gray and unreadable. I can wait a few more months. You'll remain at Thornhaven as my betrothed. You'll learn to conduct yourself as a future duchess. You'll accompany me to appropriate social functions. And when the season ends, we'll wed. And if, during these months, I can't... She stopped, reformulating. What if we don't suit? We'll suit. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. I knew the moment I saw you standing in my entrance hall, dripping rainwater and defiance, that I'd made the right choice in enforcing this contract. You didn't make a choice. Your father made it for you, before you were old enough to understand what you were agreeing to. A glint of recognition surfaced in his gaze. Yes, he said quietly. He did. And perhaps that should make us allies rather than adversaries, Miss Holloway. We're both trapped by arrangements we never chose. The difference is that I've accepted my cage. You're still beating your wings against the bars. He crossed to the door, pulling it open. A servant appeared instantly in the hallway, as if they'd been waiting. Mrs. Blackwood will show you to your chambers. We'll speak again tomorrow, when you've rested and had time to consider your position. Serene rose on unsteady legs. I haven't agreed to anything. You haven't refused either. The Duke's gaze held hers. That's a beginning. She walked past him into the corridor, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the heat of his gaze on her back. The housekeeper, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, curtsied and gestured for Serene to follow. At the end of the corridor, Serene paused and looked back. The Duke still stood in the doorway of his study, half-shadowed, half-lit. He hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. "Why me?" she called out, the question escaping before she could stop it. "You could have let the contract die, found someone suitable, someone who wanted this." For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he did, his voice carried the weight of years, of secrets, of something she couldn't name. "Because I remember you, Serene. From that day 18 years ago when our fathers signed those papers. His voice dropped, soft and strange. You were 4 years old. You had ribbons in your hair, and you wandered away from the adults and found me sulking in the garden because I didn't want to be betrothed to anyone. You handed me a flower, a white daisy you'd picked from the beds, and told me that flowers made everything better. Serene's chest constricted. She had no memory of this, none at all. I kept that flower, the Duke continued. Pressed it in a book. I've carried it with me for 18 years, through my father's death, through guardians who tried to break me, through years of being told that the betrothal meant nothing, that the girl with the ribbons was nothing. He stepped back, beginning to close the door. But you were never nothing to me. You were always the promise that something in my life might one day be gentle. The door clicked shut, and Serene stood frozen in the corridor, her entire understanding of her life crumbling like ash. Sleep did not come. Serene lay in a bed softer than clouds, wrapped in linens that smelled of lavender and wealth, staring at a canopy embroidered with constellations she didn't recognize. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving behind a silence so complete it pressed against her ears like cotton. A pressed daisy, white ribbons, a promise of gentleness. She searched her memory desperately, sifting through childhood images like scattered papers, but found nothing. No grand house, no sulking boy, no moment that could have shaped her fate so completely without her knowledge. Had her parents known? Had they watched her grow up, knowing she was promised to a stranger, knowing that one day he might come to claim her? Every lullaby, every birthday, every ordinary moment suddenly felt shadowed by secrets. When dawn finally crept through the heavy drapes, Serene rose and examined her surroundings properly. The chamber was magnificent, larger than the entire upper floor of her family's mortgaged house. A writing desk by the window, a dressing table with a mirror framed in gilt, a wardrobe that could hold 20 dresses, though she'd brought only 2. A private sitting room adjoined, with its own fireplace, now cold. A door she hadn't noticed connected to what appeared to be a bathing chamber, complete with a copper tub and running water. She stared at the brass fixtures with something approaching reverence. Hot water, piped directly into the room. The cost of such luxury would have fed her family for months. A knock interrupted her exploration. "Miss Holloway. I'm Nella, your maid. May I enter?" Serene opened the door to find a young woman about her own age, with copper hair and freckled cheeks, carrying a tray laden with tea and toast. Her smile was genuine, unguarded, the first warm expression Serene had encountered in Thornhaven. "Mrs. Blackwood thought you might want breakfast in your room this morning," Nella said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "Before everything begins." "Before what begins?" Nella's smile flickered with something like sympathy. "The preparations, miss. The Duke has ordered a complete wardrobe for you. Madame Fontaine arrives at 10 o'clock for measurements. Then there's the household introduction at noon. Lady Rowena requested tea at 3 o'clock. And the Duke expects you for dinner at 7. Serene's head spun. "Lady Rowena?" His Grace's younger sister. Nella bustled about, opening curtains, laying out toiletries. "She's lovely, miss. Nothing like... Well, everyone says she's lovely. Nothing like her brother. That's what Nella had almost said. And the household introduction? You'll meet the senior staff, learn the house. Mrs. Blackwood will explain everything." Nella paused in her work, turning to face Serene with unexpected seriousness. "If I may speak freely, miss." "Please." Thornhaven can seem frightening. The house is old, and the Duke is, she chose her words carefully, reserved. But he's not unkind. Not truly. He treats the staff fairly. Pays us well. Doesn't. Another pause. Some lords treat their households poorly. He doesn't. That counts for something. It did, Serene supposed, though it didn't make her situation less impossible. She ate the toast without tasting it, drank the tea without feeling its warmth, and allowed Nella to help her dress in the better of her 2 gowns. The blue muslin was 3 seasons old and showed signs of careful repair, but it was clean and fit well enough. Madame Fontaine arrived at precisely 10 o'clock with 2 assistants and enough fabric samples to outfit an army. The modiste was French, silver-haired, and intimidating in the way of women who had dressed queens and weren't impressed by anything less. "Your coloring is good," she pronounced, circling Serene like a hawk. "Pale skin, dark hair. We work with jewel tones, deep greens, rich blues, perhaps a burgundy for evening." She produced a measuring tape. "Arms up, please." The measuring took an hour. By the end, Serene felt less like a person and more like a dress form. She'd been poked, prodded, turned, and assessed from every angle, while Madame Fontaine and her assistants debated sleeve lengths and necklines as if Serene weren't present. "The Duke specified no expense spared," Madame Fontaine noted, making a final adjustment to her sketches. 20 dresses minimum. Ball gowns, morning dresses, riding habits, everything a duchess requires. "I'm not a duchess yet," Serene said. Madame Fontaine's smile was knowing. "The Duke seems quite certain." "You will be." The household introduction went more smoothly than Serene expected. Mrs. Blackwood was efficient and thorough, guiding her through the manor's main rooms while explaining the routines, the schedules, and the invisible machinery that kept such a vast estate running. The staff were polite, curious, and carefully neutral. By the time 3 o'clock arrived, Serene was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Her mind felt stretched thin, overfilled with names and rooms and expectations. Tea with Lady Rowena, she assumed, would be another exercise in endurance. She assumed wrong. Lady Rowena Ashworth burst into the drawing room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She was perhaps 19, with her brother's dark hair, but none of his severity. Her eyes were warm brown, her smile wide and unguarded, her energy the opposite of the cold formality that seemed to permeate every other corner of Thornhaven. "Finally!" she exclaimed, grasping Serene's hands before she could even curtsy. "I've been dying to meet you. Draven wouldn't tell me anything except that you were coming and that I should be kind. Which is ridiculous because I'm always kind, aren't I, Mrs. Blackwood?" The housekeeper, who had accompanied Serene, made a diplomatic sound. "Lady Rowena has a generous spirit." "You see? Generous spirit. That's code for talks too much and means well, but I don't care. Sit, please. I've ordered all the best cakes because days like this require sugar." She pulled Serene toward a settee near the window. "You must be absolutely overwhelmed. This house is a mausoleum on the best of days, and Draven is about as welcoming as a glacier. Has he been horrible?" The rapid shift from Serene's own thoughts to this whirlwind of warmth left her momentarily speechless. No, not horrible. Cold, perhaps. Cold is his natural state. Don't take it personally. He's been like that since—" Rowena stopped abruptly, her bright expression dimming. "Well, for a long time. But I think you might be good for him." "I'm not here by choice," Serene felt compelled to point out. "I was sold to settle my family's debts." "Oh, I know. It's dreadfully medieval." Rowena poured tea with surprising grace, her earlier energy channeling into focused hospitality. Draven explained the contract, the history, all of it. I think he expected me to be horrified, but honestly, I'm just relieved he's finally doing something instead of brooding in his study and terrifying the household. Relieved that he's acquired a wife against her will? Relieved that he's acknowledging he needs someone. Rowena pressed a cup into Serene's hands. "You don't know my brother, Miss Holloway?" "Not yet." But I've watched him build walls for 14 years. Walls against everyone who might care for him. Walls against anything that might make him feel. This contract, this arrangement, it's the first time he's reached for something since our father died. Seren thought of the pressed daisy, the white ribbons, the story she couldn't remember. He told me we met before, she said slowly. When the betrothal was first arranged, he said he kept a flower I gave him. Rowena's eyes widened. He told you about the daisy? He's never told anyone about the daisy? I only know because I found it once in his study, and he nearly took my head off for touching it. Why would a flower matter so much? Because you gave it to him. Rowena's voice softened. You have to understand, our father was difficult, cold, critical. Nothing Draven did was ever good enough. He was 14 and being told he had to marry some merchant's daughter to secure trade deals, and he was furious. Not at you, at the situation, at being treated like a chess piece. She set down her teacup. But then this tiny girl with ribbons in her hair wandered over and gave him a flower and told him it would make everything better. And for a moment, it did. For a moment, someone saw him as a person instead of an asset. He's never forgotten that. Emotion welled unexpectedly in Seren's chest. She'd spent the night thinking of herself as a victim, trapped by circumstances and cruelty. She hadn't considered that the Duke might be trapped too, that his coldness might be armor rather than nature. I don't remember any of it, she admitted. You were 4, of course you don't. But he does. He's been waiting 18 years for the girl who gave him that flower. And what if I'm not that girl anymore? What if I never was? Rowena tilted her head, considering. Then perhaps you can become someone better. Someone who can see past his walls. Someone who can remind him that there's more to life than duty and revenge. Revenge? The word hung in the air. Rowena's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. I've said too much. She reached for the cake plate, her brightness returning with obvious effort. Try the lemon cake, it's excellent. But Seren's mind had snagged on that word. Revenge. Against whom? For what? The door opened before she could press further. Ladies! The Duke stood in the doorway, still dressed in black, still radiating that cold authority that made the air feel thinner. His gaze moved from his sister to Seren, assessing. I trust tea is going well. Wonderfully, Rowena chirped. Seren was just telling me how welcoming you've been. If the Duke noticed the sarcasm, he didn't show it. Miss Holloway, I need a word. Alone. Rowena made an exasperated sound. Draven, she's barely had time to eat. Can't your dark brooding wait until dinner? No. His eyes remained fixed on Seren. It's about her brother. Ice flooded Seren's veins. Corwin? What about him? Come with me. The Duke turned and walked away, clearly expecting her to follow. She followed. He led her back to his study, that warm room of books and firelight that felt less threatening in daylight. But the Duke's expression killed any comfort. He stood by the window, staring out at grounds washed clean by last night's rain. Your brother arrived at the gatehouse an hour ago, he said without preamble, demanding to see you, demanding I release you from what he called your imprisonment. Hope and dread tangled in Seren's chest. You refused him. I had him removed from the property. He's currently at the village inn, presumably drinking away what little money he has left. The Duke turned to face her. He's also been making claims in the village, telling anyone who'll listen that I've abducted you, that the contract is fraudulent, that he'll see me ruined. He's desperate. He means every word. The Duke's voice cut like a blade. And he's going to destroy what's left of your family if someone doesn't stop him. Seren's legs weakened. She reached for the back of a chair, steadying herself. I need to see him, talk to him, make him understand. And say what? That you've agreed to marry the man who holds your family's debts? That you're here willingly? You haven't agreed to anything yet. The Duke crossed toward her, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet those pale gray eyes. But perhaps it's time you did. You're using my brother as leverage, just like you use the debts. I'm offering you a choice. His voice dropped, intense and low. Agree to honor the betrothal, commit to becoming my wife, and I will personally ensure that your brother's debts are cleared, his reputation salvaged, and his future secured. I'll do the same for your parents. They'll want for nothing. And if I refuse, then your brother continues his crusade, and I am forced to respond. I will not have my name slandered, Serene. Not even by fools with good intentions. He'll face the full consequences of defamation, and your family will face the consequences of their debts. Every last penny. She saw it then, the trap she'd been walking toward since the moment her father signed that contract 18 years ago. Every path led here, every choice narrowed to this. But she also saw something else, a brief flicker of hope in those gray eyes. You're giving me conditions, she said slowly. That means I can give you conditions, too. His expression altered subtly, surprise breaking through his careful control. You want to negotiate. I want to survive. I want my family to survive, but I won't be property. Not entirely. She lifted her chin, summoning courage she wasn't sure she had. 3 conditions. Agree to them, and I'll honor the betrothal. Silence stretched between them. The Duke's gaze moved over her face, searching for something she couldn't name. Name them, he said finally. First, I want letters exchanged with my mother freely, without censorship. She deserves to know I'm well. Reasonable. Agreed. Second, my brother must be allowed to see me. Supervised, if you insist. But allowed. I won't have him believing I've vanished into some prison. A muscle worked in his cheek. Also agreed, though he'll be removed if he causes trouble. And third, Seren held his gaze, pouring every ounce of her remaining strength into the words. You will tell me the truth about everything. The contract, the past, whatever revenge Rowena started to mention before she stopped herself. I won't marry a man shrouded in secrets I don't understand. The Duke went very still. My sister talks too much. She cares about you. That's not the same thing. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. You have my word. All 3 conditions. The truth, when you're ready to hear it. Seren looked at his outstretched hand. Large, scarred across the knuckles. Capable of both violence and gentleness, she suspected. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, and something passed between them. Not quite alliance. Not quite trust. The betrothal is confirmed, then. His voice was rough. You'll remain at Thornhaven as my future Duchess. You'll learn what that requires, and when the season ends, we'll wed. She completed his sentence, tasting the words like bitter medicine. I understand. He didn't release her hand immediately. Instead, he turned it gently, examining her palm as if reading fortunes there. You have strong hands, he murmured. Working hands. Not what I expected from a merchant's daughter. My family hasn't had servants for 3 years. I've learned to work. His expression changed, something unreadable surfacing briefly. You'll find the work here is different, he said, but I suspect you'll manage. He released her hand and stepped back, the moment of strange intimacy dissolving. Dinner is at 7. Dress appropriately. My grandmother arrives the day after tomorrow, and she'll want to assess the situation. Another test, another gauntlet to run. Your grandmother. The Dowager Duchess of Thornhaven. His smile was thin, humorless. She's going to hate you on principle. Try not to let her see it bothers you. He left without waiting for a response. Seren stood alone in the study, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it. Through the window, she could see the garden stretching toward distant hills, green and manicured and perfect. A cage, she'd thought last night. But cages could be gilded. And sometimes, if one was clever enough, cages could be escaped. Or perhaps, something whispered in the back of her mind. They could be transformed into something else entirely. The Duke had promised her truths when she was ready. She intended to be ready very soon. Dinner that evening was a study in tension. The dining room could have seated 40, but only 3 places were set at one end of the massive mahogany table. Seren sat to the Duke's right, Rowena to his left, the distance between them still vast enough that conversation required effort. Candles flickered in silver candelabras, casting dancing shadows across walls, hung with tapestries depicting hunts and battles. Servants moved silently, appearing and disappearing like ghosts, replacing courses with choreographed precision. Serene had never seen so much food intended for so few people. Soup, fish, roasted pheasant, vegetables and sauces she couldn't name, pastries that looked too beautiful to eat. She navigated the array of silverware with careful attention, grateful for the lessons her mother had insisted upon years ago, back when they'd still had pretensions of social climbing. "You handle a fish fork correctly," the Duke observed, his first words since they'd sat down. "Most people fumble it." My mother believed in preparation for possibilities. Seren kept her voice neutral. Even possibilities that seemed unlikely. Like dining with dukes? Like dining anywhere that required more than one fork. Rowena laughed, breaking the tension. "I like her, Draven. She doesn't simper." "No," the Duke agreed, his gaze resting on Seren with that unsettling intensity. "She doesn't." The meal continued in fits and starts of conversation. Rowena carried most of the burden, chattering about London fashions, upcoming events, people Seren had never heard of. The Duke contributed occasional comments, dry observations that might have been humor if delivered with any warmth. Seren listened and learned. She learned that the Thornhaven estate encompassed 12,000 acres, that the Duke sat in the House of Lords, but rarely spoke, that Rowena had been presented at court 2 seasons ago, but had yet to accept any of her numerous suitors. "She's too particular," the Duke said when this topic arose. "I'm waiting for someone who sees me as more than a title and a dowry," Rowena countered. "Surely that's not too much to ask." Brother and sister exchanged a look that Seren couldn't decipher. There was affection there, buried beneath layers of formality and old pain, a family fractured by something, and slowly, imperfectly, trying to heal. After dinner, Rowena excused herself with claims of fatigue, leaving Seren alone with the Duke in a drawing room that felt too large and too quiet. "Walk with me," he said. Not a request. They walked through corridors she hadn't seen during Mrs. Blackwood's tour, past galleries of portraits, past rooms shrouded in dust covers, past windows that looked out on moonlit gardens. The Duke moved like a man who knew every shadow, every creaking board, and every secret this house contained. "Thornhaven has stood for 300 years, he said as they walked. "Every Duke has added something. Wings, gardens, follies. My father added the East Gallery and a billiard room he never used." He paused before a door, his hand resting on the handle. "I've added nothing. I've only maintained what others built." "That's not nothing. Preservation requires effort. It requires obligation. Effort implies choice." He opened the door. "This was my mother's sitting room. No one's used it since she died." The room beyond was small by Thornhaven standards, but beautiful. Faded blue wallpaper. Windows overlooking a rose garden. A writing desk still bearing a dried inkwell and yellowed paper. Everything preserved exactly as it had been left. A shrine to a woman 20 years gone. "Why show me this?" Serene asked. "Because you asked for truth." The Duke moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "My mother died when I was 12. Rowena was 5. She barely remembers her. I remember everything." Serene waited, sensing that interruption would shatter whatever fragile moment this was. "My father blamed Rowena for her death. Childbed fever. Irrational, but grief rarely follows logic. He couldn't look at his daughter without seeing his wife's death. So he looked at me instead. Put everything onto me. Every expectation, every demand, every disappointment." His voice remained flat, reciting facts rather than feelings. The betrothal to you was one of his schemes. Trade connections, financial advantages. He didn't care that I was 14 and terrified. Didn't care that I had no say. The Duke turned from the window. "When he died 2 years later, I thought I was free. The guardians told me the betrothal was void. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. But you kept the daisy. I kept the daisy." His smile was bitter. "The one piece of evidence that someone, somewhere, had once been kind to me without wanting anything in return. A 4-year-old girl with ribbons in her hair." Serene's chest ached with something she didn't want to name. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. She knew what it meant to be trapped by family expectations, to carry burdens not of your choosing. "When did you learn the truth about the contract still being valid?" 3 years ago. I was reviewing my father's papers and found the original documents. The guardians had lied. The contract was never void. Your father knew. Everyone knew except me. 3 years. He'd known for 3 years and done nothing until now. "Why wait?" she asked. "Why not come for me immediately?" The Duke's expression darkened. "Because I wasn't ready. Because I needed to be certain. Because—" He stopped, his face going rigid. "There are things you don't know yet. Things that will change how you see this situation. The revenge Rowena mentioned. Yes. Tell me. Not tonight." He moved past her toward the door. "Tomorrow, my grandmother arrives. She'll test you in ways I cannot prepare you for. Survive her scrutiny first. Then we'll discuss the rest." He paused in the doorway, half turned, his profile sharp against the corridor's lamplight. "One more thing. My grandmother doesn't know about the original betrothal. As far as she's aware, you're here because of your family's debts, nothing more. I'd prefer to keep it that way." "Why?" "Because the truth would give her ammunition I'm not prepared for her to have." His eyes met hers, ice pale and strangely vulnerable. "Trust me in this. Please." It was the please that undid her, a word that seemed foreign in his mouth, offered like a gift he wasn't sure would be accepted. "I'll keep your secret," she said. "For now." He nodded once and disappeared into the shadows. Serene stood alone in his mother's preserved sitting room, surrounded by the ghosts of a family she was being asked to join. The day after tomorrow, the Dowager would arrive. Another battle awaited. She only hoped she had the strength to fight it. The Dowager Duchess of Thornhaven arrived at precisely 11 o'clock, her carriage sweeping up the drive with the inevitability of approaching weather. Serene watched from her window as footmen scrambled to attention, as the carriage door opened to reveal a woman who seemed carved from the same stone as the gargoyles decorating the roofline. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in unrelenting black. She surveyed Thornhaven's entrance with the expression of a general inspecting troops she expected to find lacking. "She's terrifying," Nella breathed from behind Serene's shoulder. "She's meant to be. Mrs. Blackwood says she once made a footman cry just by looking at him. Encouraging." Seren smoothed the skirts of her new morning dress, a soft sage green that Madame Fontaine had rushed through overnight. At least she wouldn't face this battle in mended muslin. Small mercies mattered. The summons came within the hour, not to the formal drawing room as Seren expected, but to the Dowager's private chambers on the second floor. A deliberate choice, forcing Seren to enter the older woman's territory. The Dowager sat enthroned in a wing-backed chair, the window behind her casting her face in shadow while illuminating anyone who approached. Another deliberate choice. This woman weaponized everything, even light. So, the single word cracked like a whip. "You're the debtor's daughter." Seren curtsied, grateful her legs didn't tremble. "I am Seren Holloway, your grace. I know who you are. I know what you are." The Dowager's eyes, a paler gray than her grandson's, swept over Seren with surgical precision. "What I don't know is why my grandson has installed you in this house, like a kept woman, rather than dealing with your family's debts through proper channels. I cannot speak to His Grace's reasoning, Your Grace." "Can't you? You've been here barely 3 days. Surely you've formed some theory." The trap was obvious. Agree with the characterization, and she admitted to impropriety. Deny it, and she called the Dowager a liar. Seren chose a third path. "I believe His Grace saw an opportunity for mutual benefit. My family's debts are resolved. His household gains a future duchess, who owes him everything. It's a practical arrangement." Practical. The Dowager tasted the word like spoiled wine. "My grandson is many things, but practical isn't one of them. He's prideful, stubborn, and prone to dramatic gestures that serve emotion over logic." She leaned forward, her gaze sharpening. "What hold do you have over him?" "None, Your Grace." "Lies. I've watched that boy struggle since his father died. He's never shown interest in marriage, never entertained a single prospect I've presented. Now, suddenly, he produces a penniless nobody from a disgraced family and announces she'll be his duchess?" The Dowager's laugh was brittle. "Something compels him. What is it?" Seren thought of the pressed Daisy, the secret she'd promised to keep. The truth burned on her tongue, but she swallowed it. Perhaps he simply grew tired of waiting for someone suitable. Perhaps I was convenient. Convenient. The Dowager rose, moving closer with the slow deliberation of a predator. "You speak well for a merchant's daughter. Your manners are acceptable. Your appearance is passable. But acceptable and passable don't explain why my grandson looked at you over breakfast this morning, like you held answers to questions he's been asking for years." The observation landed like a blow. Seren hadn't noticed the Duke watching her at breakfast. She'd been too focused on her eggs, on surviving another meal under the weight of Thornhaven's expectations. "I cannot control how His Grace looks at me." "No, but you can control what you do with that power." The Dowager stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Seren could smell her perfume. Something old-fashioned, roses and authority. "I am going to tell you something, Miss Holloway, and you will listen carefully." Seren held her ground. "I'm listening. My grandson carries scars you cannot see. His father was a cruel man who demanded perfection and punished anything less. His guardians were worse, more interested in the estate's wealth than the boy's well-being. By the time Draven reached his majority and took control, he had learned to trust nothing and no one." The Dowager's voice remained cold, but something stirred beneath it. Not warmth, exactly. Something closer to grief. "I was not kind to him during those years. I was too consumed with my own losses, my own struggles against the Guardian's control. By the time I realized what they'd done to him, the damage was complete. My grandson became the man you see now. Cold. Controlled. Armored against anything that might wound him." Seren's chest constricted. She thought of the Duke's flat recitation of his childhood the night before, the preserved sitting room, the days he kept for 18 years. And then, the Dowager continued, 3 years ago something changed. He became obsessed with old documents, spent months investigating matters he wouldn't discuss. When I pressed him, he said only that he was correcting an old wrong. I assumed he meant estate business. Now I wonder if he meant you. Your Grace. I don't want your explanations. I want your commitment. The Dowager's hand shot out, gripping Seren's chin with surprising strength. If you are using my grandson, if this is some scheme to extract wealth from a vulnerable man, I will destroy you. I will ensure you never find work, never find shelter, and never find peace. Your family will suffer. Your brother will rot. Your parents will die in squalor. The threats were delivered without heat, without drama. Simple facts, promises that would be kept. But the Dowager released her chin. If you are genuine, if you can reach whatever remains of the boy he was before his father broke him, if you can give him what he's been seeking in that pressed flower he thinks no one knows about. Serene's breath caught. Yes, I know about the daisy. The Dowager's smile was thin, bitter. I've known for years. I simply never understood its significance until now. She stepped back, returning to her throne-like chair. You're the girl from the garden, the one who gave him that flower all those years ago. There was no point denying it. He told you? He told me nothing. But I'm not a fool. The Dowager settled into her seat, suddenly looking older, more tired. His father arranged that betrothal without my knowledge or consent. By the time I learned of it, the contracts were signed. I assumed it died with my son. Clearly, I was wrong. The contract was never voided. His guardians lied. They lied about many things. The Dowager's voice hardened. And they paid for it, eventually. Draven made certain of that. Revenge. There it was again. The thread running beneath everything. What did they do to him? Seren asked. Beyond lying about the contract? That is not my story to tell. The Dowager studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. But I will tell you this. My grandson has enemies, powerful ones. People who profited from his minority and lost that profit when he came of age. People who would like nothing more than to see him humiliated, ruined, destroyed. And these enemies, they'll target me? They'll target anyone he shows attachment to, which is why— The Dowager paused, choosing words carefully. Which is why his interest in you is both promising and dangerous. If he truly cares for you, you become a vulnerability. If this is merely strategy, you become a tool. And if it's both? The question surprised even Seren, but it felt true. She was a vulnerability and a tool, strategy and something more. The Duke's feelings, whatever they were, didn't fit neatly into categories. The Dowager's eyes narrowed with something that might have been respect. Then you're cleverer than I expected. Good. You'll need cleverness to survive what's coming. What is coming? The Amberton Ball, 3 days hence, your first public appearance as Draven's intended. The Dowager rose, moving toward the door to signal the interview's end. Everyone will be watching, his allies, his enemies. Lady Cressida Stonebridge, who expected to be standing where you now stand. A rival. Of course there was a rival. Lady Cressida is the daughter of the Earl of Stonebridge, the Dowager continued. She's been pursuing my grandson for 4 seasons. Her family was close with the Guardians during Draven's minority. Very close. She won't accept your presence gracefully. Is she dangerous? Everyone is dangerous, Miss Holloway. The Dowager opened the door. The question is whether you're dangerous enough to match them. Seren stepped into the corridor, her mind reeling with new information, new threats, and new complications. "Miss Holloway," she turned. The dowager stood framed in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "The daisy. Where did you get it? Do you remember?" Seren shook her head. "I don't remember any of it. The garden, the meeting, giving him the flower. Nothing. Interesting." The dowager's smile was strange, almost sad. "Because according to my late son's notes, there were no daisies in the Thornhaven gardens that day. No white flowers at all." The door closed, leaving Seren alone with an impossible question. If there were no daisies in the garden, where had the flower come from? The Amberton ball blazed like a fallen star, light and music and laughter spilling from every window of the grand estate. Carriages lined the drive, a parade of wealth and privilege, each delivering passengers who glittered with jewels and self-importance. Seren stood at the entrance in a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered with each movement. Madame Fontaine had outdone herself. The cut was elegant without being ostentatious, the color deep enough to suggest sophistication rather than innocence. Small sapphires dotted her hairpiece, borrowed from the Thornhaven collection, their weight unfamiliar against her scalp. She felt like an imposter, dressed for a play she hadn't rehearsed. "Breathe." The Duke's voice came low beside her, a ribbon of warmth in the cold night air. "You look like you're marching to execution." "Aren't I?" His hand found the small of her back, steadying. The touch sent electricity through her spine. "Stay close. Follow my lead. And whatever Lady Cressida says to provoke you, don't rise to it." "You assume she'll provoke me." "I know she will." His expression turned to stone. "She's been planning this moment since she learned of our engagement." "You make her sound formidable." "She is formidable. She's also vindictive, ambitious, and convinced she deserves everything she wants, simply because she wants it." The Duke guided her forward, up the grand steps, into the blazing light of the entrance hall. "Her family profited enormously during my minority. When I came of age and began investigating their dealings, she took it personally." "The enemies your grandmother mentioned." "Among others." They were announced with full formality, their names ringing across the ballroom like a declaration of war. Conversations stuttered. Fans rose to hide whispered comments. Every eye in the room turned toward them, assessing, judging, and hungry for scandal. The Duke moved through the crowd with the easy authority of someone who owned rooms by existing in them. His hand remained at Serene's back, proprietary and warm, guiding her through a labyrinth of introductions and pleasantries. Lord this, Lady that, the Earl of somewhere, the Countess of nowhere. Names and faces blurred together, each one watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and contempt. "She's quite pretty," someone murmured, just loud enough to hear, in that unfortunate, common sort of way. "Debtor's daughter," came another whisper, "scandalous even for Thornhaven." Seren kept her chin high, her expression serene, and her fingers digging into her borrowed gloves hard enough to leave marks. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. The Duke noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. "Ignore them," he murmured, during a brief respite between introductions. "They're jackals. They attack what they fear. They don't fear me. They fear what you represent. Change, disruption. Proof that their precious social order can be upended by a girl with nothing but wit and spine." Before she could respond, a new figure materialized before them. Lady Cressida Stonebridge was beautiful in the way of poisoned apples, perfect on the surface, deadly underneath. Golden hair arranged in elaborate curls. Eyes the color of summer grass, bright and sharp. A gown of rose silk that must have cost more than Seren's family had earned in a year. "Your Grace." Her curtsy was flawless, her smile radiant. How wonderful that you could finally attend. We've missed you at these gatherings. Lady Cressida, the Duke's voice could have frozen water. I wasn't aware my attendance was tracked so closely. Everything about you is tracked closely. Her eyes slid to Serene, the smile sharpening. And this must be your little charity project. Miss Holloway, isn't it? I've heard so much about your family's difficulties. Lady Cressida, Serene matched her tone for tone. I've heard nothing about you at all. But then, I've been rather busy settling into my new position. The barb landed. Lady Cressida's smile flickered just slightly before stabilizing. Your new position? Yes. Such a remarkable ascent from debtor's daughter to ducal consort. One wonders what talents earned such a promotion. The implication was clear. Serene felt heat rise in her cheeks, anger more than embarrassment. One doesn't need to wonder, she replied smoothly. One can simply observe. Good breeding, proper education, the ability to maintain composure when faced with vulgarity. She let her own smile sharpen. Though I understand, not everyone possesses those skills. Lady Cressida's eyes flashed. For a moment, something ugly moved beneath her perfect facade. How delightful! The merchant's daughter has claws. She turned to the Duke, her hand reaching for his arm with familiar ease. Draven, darling, surely you'll save me a dance for old time's sake. We have so much to discuss. The use of his given name was deliberate, intimate, a claim staked in public. Serene waited for the Duke to pull away, to establish boundaries. He didn't. Perhaps later, he said, neither accepting nor refusing. Miss Holloway and I have obligations tonight. Of course. Obligations. Lady Cressida's smile was knife-bright. Though I do wonder, Your Grace, if you've fully considered what you're doing. The ton has long memories. Certain associations carry weight. Others carry burdens. I'm quite capable of determining my own burdens, Lady Cressida. Are you? Her voice dropped, soft enough that only the three of them could hear. Your father thought the same, and look where it led him. Chasing merchants and trade deals while his estate crumbled from within. Perhaps poor judgment runs in the family. The Duke's entire body went rigid. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Be very careful, Lady Cressida. I'm always careful. That's what separates us from those who aren't. Her gaze cut to Serene one final time. Enjoy the ball, Miss Holloway. These fairy tales rarely end well for the Cinders. She swept away in a rustle of rose silk, leaving poison in her wake. The Duke stood frozen, his hand still at Serene's back, but his mind clearly elsewhere. She could feel the tension radiating from him, barely contained fury vibrating beneath the controlled surface. Your Grace? Not here. His voice was rough. Come. He led her away from the ballroom, through corridors she didn't know, past servants who quickly looked elsewhere. The further they went, the quieter it became, until finally, he pulled her into a small sitting room and closed the door. The mask cracked. Draven, he said harshly, if we're to be married, you should use my name. Draven. It felt strange in her mouth, intimate, dangerous. What she said about your father was designed to wound, and it worked. He moved to the window, bracing his hands against the frame, his back to her. I spent every day trying to undo what he built. Every corrupt deal, every compromised alliance, every weakness the Guardians exploited, and still people see him when they look at me. Still they whisper that I'm my father's son. Serene approached carefully, sensing she was witnessing something he showed no one. Are you? I don't know. The admission seemed torn from him. I have his face, his position, his responsibilities. How much of what I am is choice, and how much is blood? You're asking the wrong question. She stopped beside him, not touching, simply present. The question isn't whether you're your father's son. The question is whether you're satisfied being only that. He turned his head, those gray eyes meeting hers with raw intensity. And if I'm not, then you build something different, deliberately, consciously, not in reaction to what he was, but in pursuit of what you want to be. What if I don't know what that is? Then you find out, one choice at a time. Silence stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had words for. Seren was acutely aware of how close they stood, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his breathing had shifted from agitated to something slower, more deliberate. You should be furious with me, he said quietly, for bringing you into this, for exposing you to people like Cressida. I'm not made of glass. No, you're not. His hand rose, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, almost reverent. You're stronger than I expected, stronger than anyone I've known. You barely know me. I've known you for 18 years. His thumb traced her cheekbone, following the same path it had that first night in the entrance hall. I've carried the idea of you for 18 years, hoping, wondering, trying to convince myself the girl with the ribbons was just a dream. I'm not that girl anymore. I don't even remember being her. I know, his voice dropped, soft and strange. But maybe you don't need to remember. Maybe what matters is who you're becoming now. The door burst open. They sprang apart as Lady Cressida swept into the room, triumph blazing in her green eyes. "Oh dear," she said, her voice carrying perfectly to the corridor behind her, where several curious faces had gathered. "I do hope I'm not interrupting anything improper. Though I suppose impropriety is expected from certain quarters. Witnesses. She'd brought witnesses." The Duke's expression hardened to stone. "Lady Cressida, you seem to have lost your way. The ballroom is in the opposite direction." "I was concerned for Miss Holloway's well-being. She seemed distressed when you pulled her away so abruptly." Lady Cressida's smile was pure malice. "Though now I see her distress was otherwise occupied." Whispers erupted from the corridor. Seren's reputation, already fragile, was crumbling in real time. "You have a talent for arriving uninvited," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "I wonder if anyone ever taught you that eavesdropping is a sign of poor breeding. And I wonder if anyone ever taught you that private meetings with unmarried men are a sign of something far worse." Lady Cressida's eyes glittered. "Though perhaps that's how things are done in merchant families. Standards do vary so dramatically by class." The Duke stepped forward, placing himself between Seren and the doorway. "Enough. I'm simply observing, Your Grace, as will everyone else, once word spreads of your little tête-à-tête." Lady Cressida smoothed her skirts with exaggerated innocence. "The Tun does so love a scandal, and you've just provided them with such a juicy one." She swept from the room, her followers trailing behind like ducklings, leaving devastation in her wake. The Duke stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," Seren whispered. "I shouldn't have let you bring me here. I should have realized you have nothing to apologize for." His voice was quiet but edged with steel. "This was my mistake, my failure to anticipate her tactics." "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we fight back." "How?" "By removing any doubt about our intentions." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "The season ends in 6 weeks. I intended to wait, to give you time to adjust, to let our connection develop naturally. But Cressida has forced my hand." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we announce our engagement formally. Tonight. before she can spin her narrative. His grip tightened. I'm saying we stop pretending this is a negotiation and start acting like the inevitability it's always been. Seren's heart hammered against her ribs. That's not how I wanted. I know, and I'm sorry. For a moment, his mask slipped again, and she saw the man beneath, the boy who'd kept a daisy for 18 years. But this is war now, Seren. And in war, sometimes, we sacrifice what we want for what we need. He offered his arm. Come, let's give them something real to talk about. She took his arm, and together, they walked back toward the ballroom, toward announcement, toward commitment, toward whatever came next. Behind them, Lady Cressida's laughter echoed through the corridor. The first battle was lost. But the war had just begun. The formal announcement landed like a thunderclap. The Duke of Thornhaven, standing at the center of the Amberton ballroom, with Serene's hand clasped in his, declared his intention to marry Miss Seren Holloway before the assembled cream of London society. No hedging, no qualifications. A simple, devastating statement of fact. The reactions rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Gasps, whispers. Lady Cressida's face going pale as milk before flushing crimson with fury. The Dowager, standing near the refreshments, raising her glass in a toast that might have been approval or resignation. And then, surprisingly, applause. Not universal, not enthusiastic, but enough people clapping, enough voices offering congratulations that the moment transformed from scandal to event. Whatever Lady Cressida had planned to spin, this narrative was stronger. The Duke had chosen. The Duke had declared. The Duke had made his merchant's daughter untouchable. For now. The days following the ball passed in a blur of activity. Callers arrived at Thornhaven in steady streams, society matrons who suddenly remembered long-forgotten connections to the Holloway family, young lords curious to meet the woman who'd captured the uncatchable Duke. Seren received them in the morning room with Rowena at her side, learning to navigate the treacherous waters of aristocratic small talk. You're doing beautifully, Rowena assured her after a particularly exhausting afternoon of visitors. Lady Pemberton actually smiled at you. She hasn't smiled since 1802. She was baring her teeth. I'm not certain it was the same thing. With Lady Pemberton, teeth-baring is the highest compliment. Rowena squeezed her hand. They're accepting you, Seren. Slowly, grudgingly, but accepting. The acceptance felt hollow. These people didn't know her. They knew only what she represented. The Duke's choice, a curiosity, a potential ally or enemy depending on how the winds shifted. Their smiles hid calculations. Their compliments concealed assessments. But there were genuine moments, too. The Duke began appearing at odd hours, finding excuses to seek her company, a question about household matters that could have been handled by Mrs. Blackwood, a book he thought she might enjoy, a walk through the gardens to show her the roses his mother had planted decades ago. She loved white roses, he said one evening, standing before a climbing bush heavy with blooms. Said they reminded her of new beginnings, fresh starts. Did you know her well, before she died? Not well enough. His voice carried old grief, softened by time but never quite healed. I was 12, old enough to remember everything, young enough to have taken her presence for granted. I assumed she'd always be there. Seren thought of her own mother, still alive but lost to her in different ways. The distance of secrets, the weight of things unsaid. My mother knew about the betrothal, she said quietly. All those years she knew, and she never told me. Are you angry? I don't know what I am. She reached out, touching a white petal with her fingertip. I keep trying to understand why they kept it secret. Were they protecting me, hoping it would never matter? or simply too ashamed to admit they'd sold their daughter before she could walk. Perhaps all three. Draven moved closer, his presence warm against the evening chill. Parents make choices they believe are right. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're simply human. You're being remarkably forgiving for a man who spent years believing he'd been deceived. I've had time to process my anger. His hand covered hers on the rose stem, careful of thorns, and I've come to realize that anger changes nothing. The contracts were signed. The past is fixed. All we can control is what happens next. And what happens next? He turned her hand over in his, examining her palm as he had that first night in the study. That depends on you, on us, on whether we can build something real from foundations laid by others. You speak as if you've already decided it's possible. I decided that 18 years ago. His thumb traced the lines of her palm, sending shivers up her arm. When a girl with ribbons gave me hope I didn't know I needed. Serene's breath caught. The daisy. Your grandmother said there were no daisies in the garden that day. No white flowers at all. Draven stilled. She told you that? She found it strange. So do I. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. There's something I need to show you. Something I should have shown you before now. He released her hand. Come to my study after dinner. There are truths I've been delaying. It's time you knew all of it. The words hung between them, heavy with promise and threat. All of it? She pressed. Including the revenge? Including everything. Dinner was interminable. Serene pushed food around her plate, too anxious to eat, too aware of Draven's presence at the head of the table. The Dowager watched them both with knowing eyes. Rowena chattered nervously, sensing the tension, but unable to name it. When the meal finally ended, Serene slipped away to the study. Draven was already there, standing before the fire with a wooden box in his hands. The box was old, its wood darkened by age, its brass hinges tarnished. Close the door, he said. She did. He set the box on the desk and opened it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a pressed flower. White petals, brown with age, fragile as dreams. The daisy, she breathed. The daisy. He lifted it carefully, cradling it as if it were made of glass. You're right that there were no daisies in the garden that day. No white flowers of any kind. I've checked the estate records. The gardener's logs. There's no explanation for where this came from. Then how? I don't know. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty, wonder. You were 4 years old. You wandered into the garden, found me sulking behind the hedges, and pressed this into my hand. You said flowers made everything better, and then you ran back to your mother, and I never saw you again. Until now. Until now. He set the daisy back in its box. For 18 years I've wondered. Was it a child's imagination? A flower from some other garden, carried in your pocket, or something else entirely? Something else? My mother believed in signs, in fate, in the idea that certain people are connected across time and circumstance. He closed the box, his hand lingering on the lid. She used to say that when something impossible happens, it's the universe trying to tell us something. What do you think it's trying to tell us? That you were meant to find me. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. That we were meant to find each other. That whatever happened 18 years ago, whatever force placed that flower in your hand, it was leading us here, to this moment, to this choice. The firelight danced across his features, softening the severity, revealing the man beneath the duke. You said there was more, Serene said quietly. The revenge, the enemies, the full truth. Yes. He moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a leather folder thick with documents. During my minority, my guardians systematically looted the estate, diverted funds, sold properties, allowed tenants to suffer while they enriched themselves. When I came of age and discovered the scope of their theft, I swore I would recover every penny. Lady Cressida's family was involved. Her father was the worst of them. The Earl of Stonebridge served as my primary guardian. He stole over £50,000 before I stopped him. Draven's expression hardened. He also destroyed evidence of the betrothal contract, told me it was void when he knew it was binding, told your father I'd renounced it, ensuring he'd never reach out to verify. The pieces clicked together. He wanted to keep you isolated, controllable. He wanted me to marry Cressida, unite our families, give him permanent access to Thornhaven's wealth. Draven's smile was cold. When I came of age and refused, when I began investigating his crimes, he declared war. Everything since then has been a battle. The social attacks, the whisper campaigns, Cressida's pursuit dressed as romance. And me? Where do I fit in this war? You're the one thing he couldn't anticipate. Draven crossed to her, taking her hands in his. The contract he thought he'd destroyed. The connection he couldn't sever. The proof that his machinations failed. So I'm a weapon. You're a miracle. His grip tightened. You're the girl who gave me hope when I had none. The woman who walked into my house with nothing but dignity and spine. The one person in 18 years who's looked at me and seen something other than a title or a target. Draven, I'm falling in love with you. The words came out raw, unguarded. I've been falling since the moment you stood in my entrance hall and told me you were terrified, but refused to look away. And I know you didn't choose this. I know I've forced you into an impossible position. But I need you to know that whatever this started as, whatever contracts or debts or schemes brought us together, what I feel now is real. Seren's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything she'd built, every wall she'd constructed to protect herself from hope, trembled. I don't know what I feel, she whispered. It's too fast, too complicated, I know. He released her hands, stepping back to give her space. I'm not asking for answers tonight. I'm just asking for time. Time to prove that this can be more than an arrangement. Time to show you who I am when I'm not fighting battles or navigating schemes. And if I can't love you back, then at least you'll know the truth. His smile was sad, soft, and achingly vulnerable. That you were always more than a contract to me. That you were always mine, not because a document said so, but because something far older than paper brought us together. The fire crackled. The night pressed against the windows, and Seren felt something shift inside her chest, something that might have been the first crack in walls she'd built to survive. 3 days after the confession in the study, the Thornhaven garden party transformed the grounds into something from a painting. The garden party was Rowena's idea. We need to establish Seren socially, she'd argued over breakfast. The ball was a declaration, but a garden party is integration. Different guests, different tone, a chance for people to see her as a person, not just a scandal. The Dowager, surprisingly, had agreed. The girl needs allies. Controlled exposure is preferable to wild speculation. And so Thornhaven opened its grounds to 50 carefully selected guests on a brilliant afternoon in late spring. Tables dotted the lawn, laden with refreshments. Musicians played from a gazebo. Servants circulated with champagne and delicate sandwiches. Seren moved through the gathering with growing confidence. The conversations came easier now. She'd learned which topics were safe, which names carried weight, which subtle signals indicated acceptance or rejection. 3 weeks at Thornhaven had been an education more intensive than any school. You're flourishing, Draven murmured, appearing at her side after she'd successfully charmed a notorious gossip into something approaching warmth. Lady Whitmore rarely speaks to anyone without drawing blood. I complimented her grandson's artistic talents. Apparently, he sketches butterflies. He's 43 and lives in her attic. I didn't say the compliment was deserved. Drevin's laugh surprised them both. It was real, unguarded, a sound she'd never heard from him before. Several nearby guests turned to stare, clearly astonished that the notoriously cold Duke could produce such warmth. "You're doing that thing again," Serene said. "What thing?" "Looking at me like I'm remarkable." "You are remarkable." He said it simply, as fact. "You've taken an impossible situation and made it look effortless. You've won over people who were determined to despise you. You've made my grandmother smile, which I would have sworn was physically impossible." She smiled. "Yesterday, when you suggested she redecorate the East drawing room, I nearly fell over." Seren glanced toward where the Dowager held court near the rose gardens. The older woman caught her eye and inclined her head. Not quite a smile, but close. "I think she's decided to tolerate me." "She's decided to respect you. There's a difference." Draven's hand found hers, hidden by the folds of her skirt. "As have I." The touch was electric. Seren felt warmth rise in her cheeks, felt the eyes of 50 guests tracking every moment of their interaction. "People are watching. Let them." His thumb traced circles against her palm. "I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending this is only politics. Draven, dance with me." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't an order either. It was something in between, an invitation wrapped in hope. She took his hand. They danced on the lawn to music drifting from the gazebo, and the world fell away. The watching guests, the whispered comments, Lady Cressida's venomous glare from the edge of the crowd, none of it mattered. There was only the music, the movement, the way Draven held her as if she were precious. "I remember very little of happiness," he said quietly as they turned. "My childhood was duty. My adolescence was survival. My adulthood has been war. But these past weeks with you, I think this is what happiness might feel like." "You're not certain?" "I have limited experience for comparison." His lips quirked. "But I find myself waking each morning looking forward to the day. That seems significant." Serene's heart swelled. "I feel it too. Whatever it is. Do you?" "I didn't expect to. I expected to hate you, or at least resent you. The ruthless Duke who bought me like property." She met his eyes, letting him see the truth in hers. "But you're not what I expected. You're complicated and wounded and trying so hard to be good, despite everything that taught you otherwise. Seren, I'm not ready to say the words. Not yet. But I need you to know that something is growing. Something I didn't think was possible when I walked through your gates." The music swelled, then faded. The dance ended. They stood in the center of the lawn, hands still clasped, the world slowly reasserting itself around them. "Well," Lady Cressida's voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "How touching. The merchant's daughter has truly committed to her role." She stood at the edge of the dancing space, her green eyes glittering with malice. Beside her stood a man Serene didn't recognize, older, silver-haired, with the same sharp features and cruel smile. The Earl of Stonebridge, Lady Cressida's father. "Lord Stonebridge." Dreven's voice went flat, dangerous. "I don't recall extending an invitation to you. My daughter brought me as her guest. Surely you wouldn't deny a father the pleasure of attending social functions with his child." The Earl's smile was poison. "Besides, I wanted to meet the famous Miss Holloway, the woman who's accomplished what my Cressida couldn't." "Father," Lady Cressida hissed. "What?" "It's true. 4 seasons of careful pursuit, and you couldn't close the deal. Meanwhile, this little nobody snaps her fingers and claims the prize." The Earl circled them slowly, assessing Seren with cold calculation. "I must admit, I'm curious about your methods, Miss Holloway. What exactly did you offer that my daughter couldn't?" "A lack of scheming relatives, perhaps?" Serene heard herself say. The Earl's smile vanished. "You have spirit. I suppose that's something, though spirit rarely survives long in this world." "Is that a threat?" "A warning, from someone who's watched many ambitious young women rise and fall." His eyes cut to Draven. "Your future husband isn't as secure as he appears. There are investigations ongoing, questions about the legitimacy of certain documents, concerns about whether the current Duke is truly entitled to his position." Draven's expression turned to stone. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" The Earl's smile returned. "The courts take fraud very seriously, Your Grace, and when evidence emerges that certain contracts were manufactured, well, even dukes can fall. Father, we should go." Lady Cressida tugged at his arm, her earlier confidence crumbling. "This isn't the place. On the contrary, this is exactly the place. All these witnesses, all these influential friends." The Earl raised his voice, ensuring he'd be heard. "Enjoy your garden party, Your Grace. Enjoy your merchant's bride. But don't grow too comfortable. Things are about to change." He bowed, mocking, and swept away with Lady Cressida in tow. The garden fell silent. 50 pairs of eyes fixed on Draven and Seren, waiting, watching, hungry for reaction. "Don't," Seren whispered, when she felt Draven coil beside her. "Don't give them the satisfaction." He breathed, once, twice. The murderous tension slowly drained from his frame. "You're right." His voice was steady, though his eyes blazed. "Not here." They made their excuses, departing the party with dignity intact. But as soon as they were inside, Draven's control shattered. "He's making his move." He paced the study like a caged animal. After 3 years of quiet manipulation, he's finally attacking directly. The documents he mentioned, what did he mean? The betrothal contract, the proof that the Guardian's void declaration was illegal. Draven stopped, his face ashen. "He's going to claim I forged them, that the entire basis for bringing you here is fraudulent." "But they're not forged." "Of course they're not. But proof is complicated. Witnesses have died. Records have disappeared. If he's built a convincing enough case..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "What happens if he succeeds?" Seren asked quietly. "Best case, our engagement is annulled. Your family's debts are reinstated. Everything returns to what it was before. And worst case?" Draven met her eyes, and in them she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. "Worst case, I'm tried for fraud, stripped of my title, imprisoned." His voice cracked. "And you become nothing more than another victim of the Ashworth family's corruption." The following days brought investigators, lawyers, and endless documents spread across the study's every surface. The Dowager summoned solicitors from London. Rowena canceled all social engagements. The household moved with the hushed urgency of a ship preparing for storm. And Seren watched Draven slowly crumble. He stopped sleeping. She could see it in the shadows beneath his eyes, the pallor of his skin. He stopped eating, pushing food around plates that returned to the kitchen untouched. He stopped seeking her company, retreating behind walls she'd thought were finally coming down. "He does this," Rowena explained, her own face drawn with worry. "When Father died, he disappeared into himself for months. It's how he survives. He cuts himself off from anything that might hurt him. I'm not trying to hurt him. You're the most vulnerable point he has, don't you see?" Rowena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He loves you. If Stonebridge destroys him, it destroys your future too. He's trying to protect you by pushing you away. That's idiotic. It's Draven." That night, an unexpected letter arrived. Lady Stonebridge, writing in secret, begged forgiveness for her husband's crimes. She'd enclosed copies of correspondence with Serene's mother, letters proving the betrothal's legitimacy, letters her husband had never known she'd preserved. "Why would she help us?" Serene asked, stunned. "Because she's watched her husband destroy everything he touches," the dowager replied grimly, "including their daughter's prospects. Even vipers tire of their own venom." Armed with this new evidence, Serene found Draven in his study at midnight, surrounded by papers, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, his expression was pure anguish. Then the walls slammed back into place. "You should be sleeping. So should you." She crossed to him, pushing papers aside to sit on the edge of his desk. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to say. The solicitors are working. The evidence is being compiled. Either we'll prevail or we won't." "And that's supposed to satisfy me? What would satisfy you?" He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "Promises I can't keep? Assurances I can't make? Stonebridge has been planning this for years. He has witnesses, forged documents of his own, a compelling narrative about a desperate duke who manufactured a betrothal to escape his grandmother's matchmaking. The truth doesn't matter. Truth rarely matters in court. What matters is evidence, presentation, the weight of aristocratic opinion." His laugh was bitter. "And opinion is turning. 3 lords have already withdrawn their support. 2 more are considering it. By next week, I'll be a pariah. Then we fight harder. With what? More lawyers? More documents?" He turned to face her, and his expression broke her heart. "I've spent 3 years building a case against Stonebridge, gathering evidence of his theft, preparing to destroy him as he tried to destroy me. And now he's turned it all around, made me the criminal, made my revenge look like obsession. Maybe it was obsession. What? The revenge, the investigation. 3 years of your life devoted to destroying him." Serene rose, moving toward him. "What if that's exactly what he wanted? What if he manipulated you into becoming the villain of this story? You don't understand. I understand that you've been fighting his war instead of living your life. I understand that you've given him power over every choice you've made." She stopped in front of him, refusing to let him retreat. "I understand that somewhere along the way, the boy who kept a flower for 18 years got lost in the man seeking vengeance." His face twisted. "That boy was weak, naive, easily manipulated. That boy had hope. That boy believed in gentleness." She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "That boy is still in there somewhere. I've seen him. In the gardens, on the dance floor. In every moment you've let yourself feel something other than anger." "Serene, don't push me away. Don't use this crisis as an excuse to rebuild walls I've spent weeks trying to reach past." Her voice cracked. "I came here expecting to hate you. I stayed expecting to endure you. But somewhere along the way, I started to—" She stopped. The word caught in her throat. "Started to what?" His voice was rough, desperate. "To love you." The admission tore free, terrifying and true. "I love you, Draven. Not the Duke. Not the title. Not the wealth, or the power, or the contract that bound us. You. The wounded, complicated, infuriating man who keeps a pressed flower in a box because a child once showed him kindness." Silence. His hands rose to cover hers, pressing her palms more firmly against his face. His eyes closed. A single tear escaped, tracking down his cheek. "I don't deserve that." "Probably not. But you have it anyway." He kissed her then, desperate and fierce, his arms wrapping around her, as if she were the only solid thing in a world coming apart. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the contact, trying to reach whatever part of him still believed in hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I don't know how to win this fight," he admitted. "Then stop fighting it alone." She gripped his lapels. "Let me help. Let Rowena help. Let your grandmother, insufferable as she is, bring whatever power she has to bear. You've spent so long being isolated. Maybe it's time to let people in. And if we still lose, then we lose together. But we don't lose each other. Not over this. Not over anything." The door burst open. The dowager stood in the threshold, her face pale, a letter clutched in her trembling hand. "Draven," she said, her voice unsteady. "You need to see this. Now." He took the letter, scanned it, and went white as bone. "What is it?" Seren demanded. "A summons." His voice was hollow. "The House of Lords has opened an inquiry into the legitimacy of my title, into allegations that I obtained my position through forged documents and criminal conspiracy." The dowager's composure cracked. "Stonebridge has done it. He's convinced them to investigate. How long do we have?" "The inquiry begins in 3 days. If you cannot produce evidence of the contract's authenticity by then." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. 3 days to save everything. 3 days before the man Seren loved lost his title, his home, his freedom. 3 days before she lost him entirely. Seren didn't sleep. While Draven and the solicitors worked through the night, she sat in his mother's preserved sitting room, thinking. The contracts, the guardians, the daisy. Something connected them all. Something they were missing. At dawn, she found Rowena in the breakfast room, equally sleepless, equally desperate. "There has to be something," Rowena said. "Some piece of evidence they haven't destroyed. Father kept meticulous records. He documented everything. Where would those records be? His private study, Draven's study now. But everything's been searched, multiple times." Seren thought of the wooden box, the pressed flower, the mysteries that still surrounded it, the same mysteries Draven had shown her in the study that night. "Not everything," she said slowly. "Rowena, you said your mother believed in signs, in fate. What else did she believe in?" "I don't understand." "The daisy. Your grandmother said there were no daisies in the garden that day, no white flowers at all. But your brother has one, pressed and preserved, given to him by a 4-year-old girl. Where did it come from? Why was it important enough to keep for 18 years? Rowena's brow furrowed. "Mother had a diary. She wrote in it every day. It disappeared after she died. Father claimed he burned it, but he kept everything of hers. Everything. Even her hairbrush. Even the last dress she wore." Rowena's eyes widened. What if he didn't burn it? What if it's hidden somewhere? They searched, through the attic, through storage rooms, through the preserved sitting room, where dust sheets covered furniture no one had touched in 20 years. It was Seren who found it. Hidden in the base of his mother's writing desk, in a compartment so cleverly concealed that only someone dismantling the furniture would discover it, lay a leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed, its ink faded, but legible. "Get Draven," Seren breathed. "Now." They gathered in the study, the diary open on the desk, its final entries spelling out truths that changed everything. "She knew about the betrothal," Draven said, his voice shaking as he read. "She was there when the contracts were signed. She wrote about it. About meeting the Holloway family. About watching me sulk in the garden." "Keep reading," Seren urged. His eyes moved down the page, then stopped. All color drained from his face. "My God." "What?" "The daisy. She writes about the daisy. This explains the mystery of where it came from." He looked up, his eyes wild. "She's the one who gave it to you. My mother put the flower in your hand and told you to give it to the boy in the garden. She arranged the whole thing." Seren's heart stopped. "Why?" Draven read aloud, his voice breaking. "The contracts are signed, but contracts mean nothing without connection. My son is so angry, so lost. But this little girl, this serene with her bright eyes and ready smile, perhaps she can reach him where I cannot. I gave her one of my white daisies, the ones I grow secretly in pots by my window, and told her that the sad boy in the garden needed a friend. She ran to him without hesitation. I watched from the terrace as she pressed the flower into his hand. His face transformed. For the first time in months, he smiled. Whatever happens with this betrothal, whatever becomes of contracts and commerce, I believe my son has found someone who can save him." Silence. Then Rowena burst into tears. "She knew," the dowager said quietly from the doorway, where she'd appeared without anyone noticing. "My daughter-in-law knew that Draven needed something his father could never give him. Kindness, hope. She arranged for him to receive it from the only source available." "The daisies," Seren whispered. "They weren't from the garden. They were from her private collection." "Which means this journal proves the betrothal was real." Draven's hands trembled as he held the diary. "It proves she witnessed the signing. It proves the contract existed before any guardians could have manufactured it." "Will it be enough?" Rowena asked. "It has to be." The dowager moved forward, her eyes fixed on the journal. "That's my daughter-in-law's hand. I'd recognize it anywhere. No forgery could replicate her style, her phrasing, the way she looped her letters." She took the diary gently from Draven. "This is evidence. Real evidence. The kind even the House of Lords cannot ignore." Hope flickered in Draven's eyes. Fragile, but real. "There's more," he said, flipping through the pages. "She documents meetings, conversations, witnesses who were present." He stopped at a passage, his expression hardening. "And she names the people who opposed the betrothal, who argued against it." "Who?" "The Earl of Stonebridge." Draven's voice turned to ice. "He was there that day. My mother writes that he tried to convince my father to choose a different bride, a daughter of nobility. When my father refused, Stonebridge. She says he made threats, veiled, but clear." "Threats against whom?" Draven looked up, and in his eyes burned something fiercer than hope. "Against me, against the girl with the ribbons." His expression hardened. "He's been planning this for 18 years. Long before my father died, long before the Guardians took control. This was never about money or power. This was about controlling the Ashworth line. Then we expose him." Seren took the diary, holding it like a weapon. "We take this to the inquiry, and we destroy him with his own history." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." She met his eyes, fierce and certain. "You've spent 3 years fighting defensively, protecting yourself, trying to survive his attacks. It's time to attack back." The dowager nodded slowly. "The girl is right. My grandson has been too cautious for too long. Stonebridge expects defense. Give him a fence instead." "Grandmother, do you want to win or do you want to be noble?" The dowager's eyes flashed. "Because I've watched you choose nobility for 3 years, and it's nearly cost you everything. Sometimes victory requires ruthlessness." Draven looked at Seren, at his sister, at his grandmother, 3 women who refused to let him fall. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we fight." The House of Lords chamber was ancient and imposing, designed to make supplicants feel small. Lords in ceremonial robes occupied tiered benches, their faces grave and their attention absolute. At the center, in the position of the accused, stood Draven Ashworth, Duke of Thornhaven. And beside him, refusing all custom that said she should wait elsewhere, stood Seren. "This is irregular," Lord Chancellor Pembroke said, frowning at her presence. "Miss Holloway is my betrothed, and the subject of the very documents under examination," Draven replied, his voice steady. "Her presence is essential." The Earl of Stonebridge rose from his bench, his smile confident. "I welcome Miss Holloway's presence. Let her witness the collapse of the fraud that brought her here. Perhaps then she'll understand. She was merely a pawn in a desperate man's scheme." "Strong words," Draven said, "from a man about to be exposed as a thief and conspirator." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "Exposed?" Stonebridge's smile flickered. "On what evidence?" Draven turned to the Lord Chancellor, producing the leather diary. "I present for the court's examination the private journal of my mother, Lady Catherine Ashworth, documenting events surrounding the betrothal contract in question. This journal proves the contract was signed in her presence 18 years ago, with witnesses she names explicitly." Stonebridge's face went gray. "That could be forged. Then you'll have no objection to expert examination." Draven's voice was ice. "You'll have no objection to comparing the handwriting against other verified samples of my mother's writing. You'll have no objection to the testimony of servants who watched her write in this very journal every day of her life." The chamber buzzed with whispered conversation. "Furthermore," Draven continued, turning to address the assembled lords, "this journal documents the Earl of Stonebridge's opposition to my betrothal. It records his attempts to substitute a different bride. It records threats made against me and against Miss Holloway, who was then a child of 4. He held up the diary. "The Earl has spent 18 years trying to destroy a contract he couldn't prevent. First through manipulation, then through theft. Now, through this inquiry. He's not a concerned citizen exposing fraud. He's a criminal covering his tracks." "Lies!" Stonebridge surged to his feet. "This is desperation from a man facing justice. Then prove it." Seren's voice rang through the chamber, clear and strong. "You claim the betrothal documents are forged. You claim the Duke manufactured evidence to escape an unwanted match. But you cannot explain how a forger could replicate the handwriting of a woman dead for 20 years. You cannot explain how false documents could contain accurate details known only to those present at the original signing. You cannot explain why my own mother confirms the betrothal in letters she wrote to your wife." Dead silence. Seren produced a bundle of correspondence. "Lady Stonebridge and my mother were acquainted in their youth. They maintained correspondence for years. In these letters, my mother references the betrothal arrangement, the expectations for my future, and her hope that the Ashworth family would provide stability for her daughter." She turned to Stonebridge, watching him tremble. "Your own wife's letters confirm everything the Duke claims. Did you not think to search her correspondence before launching this attack? Or did you simply assume no one would bother to look?" Lady Cressida, watching from the gallery, let out a strangled sound of horror. Stonebridge's composure shattered. "You have no right. Those letters are private. They were given to me willingly." Seren's smile was sharp. "By Lady Stonebridge herself, who has grown rather tired of her husband's schemes and their consequences for her daughter's prospects." The chamber erupted. Lord Chancellor Pembroke called for order. For one terrible moment, he raised his hand for silence, his expression grave, and Seren feared it wasn't enough. That Stonebridge's years of preparation had outweighed their desperate evidence. "The inquiry will recess," Pembroke announced, "while experts examine these documents." 3 hours. 3 hours of waiting in an antechamber while their fate was decided. Draven paced like a caged wolf. Seren sat motionless, her hands folded, her heart screaming. When the doors finally opened, when Pembroke's face revealed nothing, she stopped breathing entirely. "The documents are authentic," he declared. "The betrothal contract is valid." Evidence was examined. Experts testified. By nightfall, the inquiry had reversed entirely. The Earl of Stonebridge was taken into custody, pending investigation of fraud, theft, and abuse of guardianship. Lady Cressida fled London in disgrace. The betrothal contract was declared authentic, its terms binding, its legitimacy beyond question. And Draven Ashworth, Duke of Thornhaven, stood vindicated before the highest court in the land. In the carriage home, surrounded by family, Draven took Seren's hands in his. "You saved me. I helped. You did the rest." "No." His voice was thick with emotion. "You stood beside me when you could have walked away. You fought for me when I'd nearly stopped fighting for myself. You loved me when I was unlovable." "You were never unlovable." She squeezed his hands. "You were just very difficult." He laughed, the sound bright and free in a way she'd never heard. Then he kissed her, gentle and sweet, while Rowena cheered, and even the Dowager smiled. "When we return home," Draven said against her lips, "we're getting married. Immediately. No more waiting." "Tomorrow?" "Tonight, if I can find a vicar willing to perform the service by candlelight." Seren pretended to consider. "I suppose I could adjust my schedule." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt the future opening before them. Bright and terrifying, and absolutely worth the fight. The wedding was neither grand nor traditional. It took place at midnight in Thornhaven's chapel, candlelight dancing across ancient stones, the scent of white roses filling the air. Only family attended: the Dowager, Rowena, Mrs. Blackwood, and a handful of trusted servants, and Seren's family, all of them. Her mother, Helena, tears streaming down her face, her father, standing taller than he had in years, his debts erased, and his dignity restored. Even Corwin, humbled and grateful, finally freed from the weight of his failures. Draven had kept every promise. The Holloway family would want for nothing. "You came for me," Helena whispered, embracing her daughter. "He came for us himself." "He's not what I expected," Seren admitted. "Neither was your father, once." Her mother smiled through her tears. "Sometimes the unexpected ones are the keepers." The ceremony was brief. The vows were simple. But when Draven placed the ring on Seren's finger, when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the moment carried the weight of 18 years of waiting. "You were always mine," Draven murmured as he kissed his bride. "And you," she whispered back, "were always mine. We just didn't know it yet." The celebration lasted until dawn, champagne flowing, laughter echoing through halls that had known too much silence. For the first time in years, Thornhaven felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. The season continued without them. Seren was now a duchess, untouchable by social climbing or petty gossip. Draven withdrew from political machinations, focusing instead on the estate and the life he was building with his wife. The Dowager mellowed slightly, though she still terrified footmen with a glance. Rowena flourished, her dowry enhanced by her brother's restored fortunes, finally attracting suitors who valued her spirit rather than merely her connections. And Stonebridge rotted in prison, his schemes exposed, his legacy destroyed. "Do you regret it?" Seren asked one evening, months later, as they sat together in the library. "The revenge you never got to take yourself?" Draven considered. "I thought I would. I spent years dreaming of personally delivering his destruction. But watching you do it instead?" He smiled, genuine and warm. "That was better, because it meant I wasn't alone anymore." "You'll never be alone again." "Promise?" She answered with a kiss. Epilogue 5 years later, Thornhaven's gardens blazed with autumn color. Seren sat on a bench near the white roses, watching two small figures chase each other through the hedges. Their daughter, 4-year-old Catherine, named for the grandmother she would never meet. Their son, 2-year-old Edmund, spirited and laughing and full of mischief. Draven appeared beside her, settling onto the bench, taking her hand in his. "I found something this morning," he said. "In the attic. A box I'd forgotten existed." "Another secret?" "No." He produced a small object, pressing it into her palm. "A beginning." Seren looked down. In her hand lay a single pressed flower, brown with age but unmistakable. A white daisy. "I don't understand. The original is in your study." "This one isn't the original." His voice was soft. "This one I found in my mother's papers. Another daisy, pressed at the same time, preserved in the same way. She kept one for herself." "Why?" "There's a note with it." He pulled out a faded paper. Its script, familiar now. The looping letters of Lady Catherine Ashworth. "For the day they find their way back to each other," Seren read aloud. "For the day my son remembers that flowers make everything better." Her eyes filled with tears. "She knew," Draven whispered. 18 years ago, she knew we'd find our way here. She left this for us to discover. A blessing from beyond." Seren looked at the daisy in her hand, then at the children playing in the garden, then at the man beside her, who'd once been a boy too angry to hope. "Flowers do make everything better," she said. "No." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You made everything better. The flowers just showed me where to look." They sat together in the garden, surrounded by ghosts of the past and promises of the future. Two people who had been sold and bought and bargained over, who had found in each other something no contract could contain. Love. And every year, on the anniversary of their midnight wedding, Draven placed a white daisy in Seren's hair and reminded her of the truth that had brought them together. "You were always mine, and she always would be. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that survives impossible odds, in characters who fight for happiness despite every obstacle, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming. I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. And please leave a comment. I read every single one. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.